Hi, everyone. This video is going to focus entirely on professional communication in a business setting, but more particularly focused on the entrepreneurial setting and talking about what an entrepreneurial mindset is and how it can intersect with the way in which we communicate with others. So let's dig right in, right? Let's first kind of talk a little bit about this entrepreneurial mindset concept or component. So while you may not have ever started a business and maybe actually have no aspirations of even starting a business, I would still like to argue that having an entrepreneurial mindset can really lend yourself a lot of different opportunities throughout the course of your life, right? When we look at what it means to be entrepreneurial, typically we're talking about folks who have a high degree of independence, a preference for a unlimited structure, right? Not wanting to be held down or to be told what to do. Folks who are welcoming of risk and taking chances and being acceptive of certain types of risk. People who take action and want to move forward and are highly motivated and have a tremendous amount of passion and this focus on the future and making their dreams and their ideas come through. And why am I talking about this? Because understanding what the mindset of an entrepreneur is, and maybe if you have one, may help you to communicate that mindset to others around you. In other words, I would argue that being an entrepreneur, whether you start your own business or not, can benefit you in terms of being seen as a problem solver, as being action oriented, as being innovative or creative, as being willing to take chances. And from a professional standpoint, those times are characteristics that folks are looking for, right? Employers are looking for, colleagues and peers are looking for. And maybe if you do want to start a business, they'll certainly benefit you there too. So I want to begin by kind of taking a look at this mindset as a means of setting the stage, the standard for how we think about communicating in a professional setting. And that is to say that in order to communicate within these professional settings, sometimes it's going to require us to be creative and innovative and apply an entrepreneurial mindset. And so I am in some ways advocating for an adaptation or adoption of an entrepreneurial mindset as best you can, even if your aspirations don't draw you to starting and developing your own particular business. Now, one of the ways that I personally have been able to find some inspiration for this entrepreneurial mindset is particularly listening to stories from others in this space and doing my very best to kind of learn from their experiences by relating things that have happened in my personal life to things that happen in their entrepreneurial journey, and finding some calling or some opportunity where I can take advantage of similar challenges that have taken place to me. So I'm highly recommending listening to at least one, if not a series of the How I Built This shows, the podcast by Guy Raz on NPR, where Guy Raz now interviews these relatively established and popular and successful entrepreneurs and talks to them about their early days and their early beginnings. And what I'm advocating here for a little bit is by listening to the leaders around us, by listening to entrepreneurs in particular is what I'm focusing on. I think that it will help us from a communication standpoint because they're able to find ways to capture their core values in their business today. And for many of us, that seems rather obvious. It seems just like it's a part of the business. But by listening to their story, you get to hear how they got to that place. And the reason I'm advocating for this is because storytelling has been an important part of our course. And being able to convey your values quickly and easily and succinctly in a compelling fashion, in an authentic fashion, has been an important part of what we've labeled as professional communication. So this is an opportunity now to take one step further and say, okay, I'm going to listen to entrepreneurs who have found success, tell their stories of failing and finding challenges and seeking opportunity when it comes, so that I can look back at my stories and start to pull out the ones that are going to be effective so that I can tell my story in a relatively similar fashion. So when you go to the NPR website, right, and you search the Guy Raz show, How I Built This, there is tons of episodes, and I encourage you to go find either a business or an entrepreneur, a business owner that you've heard of, a product that they've used. Maybe you've seen them on TV, maybe you know something about them, and sit back and just enjoy listening to this story. I listen to the show regularly, and what I'm able to do from it is I can actually start to now use the stories that I'm listening to from the show as a way of relating to other people, right? So for example, in this course, one of our key messages is that if we're authentic, that will be compelling, that if we're true and honest, that it's likely people will see us as being approachable, that will be considered to be likely greater leaders because of our vulnerability. And so now what we can do is we can listen to those stories around us and start to integrate them into the way that we talk about business. And the idea here is that sometimes you won't have a story for every single thing that you want to convey to your team or your peer, or your colleagues, or your boss, or whoever it is you're communicating with. So the next best thing that you can do is sometimes tell a story that represents your core values. And because it's part of your repertoire, because you know some of the details of the story, because you remember some of the names and the places and things of that variety, it suggests that this story influenced you and it changed you, which it likely did. And so this just becomes another tactic of communicating in the workplace, of telling the story sometimes of others, especially stories that are relatable, right? So a couple of recent episodes from the show that I thought kind of really stood out to me was earlier this year, well, last year in this case, they interviewed Melanie Perkins, who was a name I was not familiar with, but who originated a product or software that I was very familiar with, and likely you are too, called Canva. I use Canva just about every day, and I find it to be one of the best pieces of software that I've ever used, and I'm a huge advocate for it, and here I'm doing that right now. One of the best parts about listening to the story from Melanie Perkins, the entrepreneur who invented it, and she's from Australia, was it started as this way of solving a problem for yearbooks. So like every high school has a yearbook every year, and putting them together is relatively challenging, and getting them printed and turned around. And she came up with the idea to basically say, well, what if I came up with a piece of software that would make this, relatively quite easy to do? And essentially years later, that's where Canva is originated from. Now, why am I telling you this particular story? I'm telling you this particular story because chances are you've solved some particular problem in your time, right? You've seen something or done something, you have designed or innovated to make some problem in your life relatively easier. And you probably haven't thought about it as being this next big business adventure, because chances are you may not have thought about your entrepreneurial mindset up to this point. But the reason I share Melanie's story about Canva is because she solved a high school yearbook problem that she was working on. And for me, that's really inspirational, because all of us have worked on things in high school and in college where we designed or developed something. Now what I can do is I can tell you the story, in this case, to empower you, my viewers, to think about things that they've done. And so I don't have to rely on my story in this case, right, which may not be all that humble if I told you about this thing that I did, but instead I can tell you Melanie's story to convey the same concepts and ideas that I wanted to have. So the guiding light or principle behind going through this section of the course, and behind really focusing on having an entrepreneurial mindset and adopting and pitching business values using other stories, is so that you're never going to say, oh, I'm limited. That never happened to me, or I can't think of something. Well, now what the challenge is you should be consuming content that's in line with your business values, so that as you're going forward, when you're in an interview or you have an opportunity to network or to impress somebody, the story that you tell them still conveys the same message, but it also maybe demonstrates your depth or knowledge or understanding beyond just the world that you live in, which I think is, one of the things that I'm often quite impressed by when I interact with others and they tell me stories about things that I didn't know. And that, of course, really stands out to me. So now is an opportunity as well to just challenge, what content are you consuming, and how is it influencing you, and what stories are you telling ultimately as a result of the content that you're consuming? One of the other things that, really that I would like to call upon here and just kind of talk about ultimately is not just telling stories, right? But being able to convey these values in the way in which we conduct our business. So you may even want to think about brands and associated networks that you're a part of, and how, from a professional communication standpoint, the groups that you're involved in social media, or the groups that you're involved in, maybe even on campus, et cetera, like, how are they going to define you? How are they going to help or support you in some way achieve those professional and vocational goals that you have coming up down the line? Again, you're going to use your stories of those organizations, of those groups, or somebody else is going to, exert kind of, what they mean about you in some way. And so those are all things that you're going to want to pay close attention to. So My encouragement here is quite simple and straightforward. Go forth and consume content that'll benefit you from the standpoint of being a better professional communicator, because now you have a plethora of stories from business values that you respect and that you lean on that may inspire or empower others to see you exactly in the light that you want to be seen.